I will make sure I give it to you. When that next time. The man I said I get to get, I'm sure in the
Hello, everybody. I say a good number of us are right on time. Thank you to everyone who joined even before the time, even before the webinar was supposed to start. So it's almost 3 o'clock. Great. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning from wherever you're joining us across the world. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This is our second webinar for the year 2025. And I say a very big thank you to everybody who has joined us from the inception of our webinars and everybody who is joining us today. And also a very big thank you to our speakers who took time out of their busy schedule to be with us today, who are joining from two different time zones. So thank you so, so much. I guess we'll just go right into the webinar, but okay, great. So let me start by saying that this webinar is recorded and some housekeeping rules before we go into the crux of the matter. So first of all, Please, everybody should try to be muted. And if you have any questions, any comments, any reactions, please put them in the chat box. There, there was going to be a very brief question and answer session. We may take just 2 or 3 questions, but we're going to throw the floor open to our speakers to talk to us about our topic for today, equity in care. Before we dive right in, I'm just going to talk a little bit about our speakers, because we have 2 very wonderful women here today with us, and I'm going to put their bios in the chat shortly. We have with us Dr. Jessica Oga. Dr. Oga is a legal scholar and a policy leader driving regional efforts for reproductive justice and health rights across Africa. And we have Ms. Chinasa Imo, a global health strategist, grassroots advocate who is championing rural health equity across continents. I'm just going to read their bios very quickly, and I'll start with Dr. Jessica Oga. Dr. Jessica Oga is a legal scholar, researcher, and advocate specializing in sexual and reproductive health and rights, international humanitarian law, and gender studies. As head of regionalism at Afia Nahaki, she leads efforts to strengthen legal and policy frameworks for reproductive justice across Africa through engagement with regional, sub-regional, and national institutions. She holds a first-class degree in law from Benson Idahosa University, a Master's of Law and Doctors of Philosophy in Laws from Babcock University, as well as an Executive Master's in Non-International Armed Conflict from the Geneva Academy, Switzerland. Her work bridges legal scholarship, strategic litigation, and policy review with particular focus on health policy and gender equality in conflict-affected settings. Through her role at Afia Nahaki, she continues to drive regional legal strategies and advocacy for reproductive justice across the continent. Her determination to succeed is anchored in the belief that there are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica Oga, for being here today. And I know that our audience can see that we have a powerhouse with us today. So many masters, a PhD. I know it's going to be a really, really packed session, and we cannot wait to learn from you. Our next speaker is Chinasa Imo. I'm just going to run through her bio briefly. She is a passionate global health and development advocate with extensive experience in health policy, communications, and humanitarian response. Before moving to the US, she worked with Options Consultancy Services Evidence for Action Mamaye program, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Starting as Nigeria's country communications officer, she later became the Niger State Advisor, where she collaborated with the Ministry of Health, civil society, and media to strengthen maternal and newborn health systems. Her work influenced budget processes and improved access to essential medicines and skilled healthcare personnel. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Chinasa supported Niger State's response as part of the Africa Union's AVOHC network, and earlier she served as a frontline responder during the 2014 Ebola outbreak, coordinating communication in Nigeria and Sierra Leone under the African Union and NCDC. She worked with several international agencies, including UNICEF, UNMEER, and the WFP. A dedicated policy advocate, she is a former One Campaign Africa champion, an active US activist, lobbying for global health funding and universal health coverage in both the US and Nigeria. Chinasa is the founder of Side-Eye Hub, a non-profit promoting social justice.
I'm going to, I'm studying something now. Like, I don't trust. What are they calling me
do
to?
well for us.
This number, they have one number. Why you put my own in the mix? That's what I mean. You don't want to put my name in the mix. Put my number in the mix.
I'm so sorry for the interruption, and I'll try to unmute right now. So sorry about that. So, as we're saying, Chinasa is the founder of Side-Eye Hub, a non-profit promoting social justice and access to rights-based services, and co-founder of Africa Youth Employment Initiative, a Pan-African platform empowering rural youth through innovative agriculture and career development. AYEI holds consultative status with the UN ECOSOC and advises the African Development Bank. She holds degrees in public administration, diplomacy, and international development policy, and is pursuing a PhD in global health and social welfare policy at the University of Chicago. She also serves as an advisor to several NGOs. Currently based in Southside Chicago, Chinasa leads psychosocial programs for women and youth experiencing adversity. She's an Albert Schweitzer Fellow, a Change Collective member, and a University of Chicago Health Policy grantee. Thank you so much, Chinasa, for being here with us today. And thank you, Dr. Jessica Oga, for also being here with us today. This program is going to be packed full with knowledge because there is a lot to talk about in equity in care. And I do not want to be the one to start talking about this. So I'm going to leave it to our speakers to talk about it, to talk about how they see the barriers, the structural, the legal, the social barriers that inhabits like equity in care in Africa, and how what sort of enforcement or what sort of tools rather are there to make sure that these barriers are curtailed, or these barriers, we can break down these barriers that affect equity in healthcare. So I'm going to go straight to Dr. Jessica Oga. Dr. Jessica Oga, I hope you're ready for, I know you're ready for us. And I thank you once again for being here with us. So I'm going to start by asking that if you can run us through, like speak very briefly about, first of all, your role as head of regionalism at Afia Nahaki, because I know I am very interested, and I know that a lot of people here on this webinar with us will be very interested to hear about what you do at Afia Nahaki, what it's about, and what your role is. And then talk to us about equity in care from your perspective as a sexual and reproductive health and rights advocate and a humanitarian law expert. Like, what are the barriers to equitable healthcare, most especially as it pertains to the most vulnerable in the society, and what strategies can you recommend to overcome them? So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I will begin by expressing my gratitude to the Medico-Legal for convening this timely and urgent conversation on equity and the medical legal barriers that continue to obstruct inclusive healthcare in our continent. I hope you can hear me. You've already done a brilliant introduction of myself and the co-speaker, Chinasa. Chinasa, it's a pleasure to share this platform with you. I am Jessica, like you said. I work as the head of regionalism at Afia Nahaki. Afia Nahaki is a research and training institute that utilizes Afrocentrism to advance health, human rights, and SRHR in Africa. So because I said Afrocentrism, I would just define what we call Afrocentrism at Afia Nahaki. At Afia Nahaki, we believe that Africans are not just passive recipients of aid, or are not just meant to be subject of study. But we believe that as Africans, we are the ones who hold the power to provide solutions to our problems. And so for us, when we talk about Afrocentrism, we basically define it as providing African solutions to African problems by engaging Africans. So when we are advancing health justice, particularly in the domain of sexual and reproductive health and rights, you'll see that most times we do it strictly with African experts. So in regionalism, basically, for us at regionalism department, we engage African institutions. So we engage the African Commission of Human and People's Rights, the African Committee of Experts on Welfare of the Child, and all of these sub-regional institutions in advancing, in doing the work that we do, which is basically advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights in Africa. So one of the ways we use our advocacy is through oral statements, activity reports and the likes of them. And also we also hold side events where we disseminate the research that we've done in order to reach the wider public. So basically that's what AHAC is about. And that's what we do as the regionalism department. So I will just jump right into your questions and answer them together. So I'll be approaching this conversation from a position that centers law as an instrument of order or a technical regulation, but not just as an instrument of order, but as a powerful determinant of health. So law, whether through acts of omission or acts of commission, actively shapes who receives care, who is denied care, and who is punished for seeking it. So like you said, I will be approaching this conversation from the ambit of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So forgive me um, if all my conversations are around SRHR, because that's where I am particularly interested, and that's where I am most expertise. That's where my expertise lies. So, like the definition said, medical legal barriers. So it means there are two terms. We have the medical and we have the legal, and then we have barriers. I don't know if there's anyone. I don't want to sound like a professor who just talks and talks and talks. But if there's anyone here who'd be able to give me a short definition of what they think medical legal is, medical legal barriers, what does it mean? Medical, legal, and then barriers. So if there's someone who can support me with giving that definition, it would be very helpful. I'll just wait for a few minutes and then we see.
Please, let's participate. If you know, just you can put it in the chat box if you don't want to speak out, or you can just unmute yourself and provide the answer. Please, let's participate in this session. Thank you.
Okay, since we've not gotten any response, I'm just going to use my executive power and call on Yusuf. At least I know Yusuf. Okay, someone is speaking here, please.
Yeah, I'm a student from hospital and healthcare. So if I may say something about medical legal barriers, I think for me it's like the obstacles that arises when there's the intersection between medical practices and legal requirements that actually interact in order for like a health institution or a healthcare professional to actually delivers or give good healthcare. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that response. That's basically what it is. So for every time I teach a class, I always say in my class, we don't have any wrong answers. But I've seen that Yusuf have added something on the group, on the chat, and he says medical legal barriers are obstacles at the intersection of healthcare and law that can restrict access to healthcare services and create challenges for provider. I think that's that's also what the first speaker had said, and um, that basically summarizes what medical legal barriers is. So medical legal barriers, I would say, legal are the legal, regulatory, or policy barriers that hinders the provision, accessibility, or quality of healthcare services. So what happens, because we're saying medical legal, we know that there is an intersection. So these barriers emerge at the intersection of medicine and law. So, but what happens when we have these barriers is that it governs. Okay, so basically, we know that laws involves rules, statutes, or institutional practice that sort of governs how the society operates. So, in this instance, we would say that laws are rules, they are statutes, or they are institutional practices that governs how care is delivered, who can access it, and under what conditions. But the problem we have is that these barriers disproportionately impact some specific groups, like marginalized and vulnerable groups, which we know includes women, adolescents, LGBTQ plus persons, and displaced communities. So in many African health systems, when we talk about medical legal barriers, we know that they are not incidental, they are systemic. So when we say they are systemic, it means that it is deeply embedded in the systems that operate. So it is deeply rooted in the very architecture of healthcare governance. And what this includes is laws that criminalizes abortion, for example, law that criminalizes full disclosure or adolescent sexuality. We also talk about some another medical legal barrier that I would classify as systemic or deeply embedded in the structure of healthcare governance is consent frameworks, frameworks that deny young people the ability to seek care for themselves, or criminal laws that prevents health providers from providing life saving services. For example, if we're lawyers here, we would know that the criminal code sort of prohibits the provision of abortion services, and I think it's 14 years imprisonment or 15 years imprisonment, if I'm not wrong. But it allows for abortion services to be provided for only on account of saving the life of the mother. So it means that the mother has to obviously be seen to be critically dying before that service can be provided. However, what we know is that these are not just natural things, they are legal tools that has been used to perpetuate iniquity and institutionalize exclusion. And the effects of this exclusion, like I had earlier mentioned, are being disproportionately felt by women, by adolescents, by displaced people, by people living with disabilities, among several others. So basically, when a young woman in northern Nigeria, for example, dies, you could it could be because her provider feared to provide abortion services even when she needed it, because she had not been physically seen to be in between life and death, in short. So what we are witnessing is that the law has been and continues to be used as an instrument of harm. I don't know if you got me up onto that point. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop it on the chat, and then I would respond when I'm done presenting. So now that we've defined medical legal barriers, we understand that definition, and then I'm hoping that we understand how laws has been institutionalized in our healthcare system, such that laws that are supposed to be used to sort of uplift the communities are being used as an instrument of control over women's bodies and over basically autonomy and agency of vulnerable groups. So but what we are increasingly seeing now is that across Africa, at least at Afia Nahaki, we have seen a deep entrenchment of criminal law in healthcare regulation. And we know that criminal law by its nature is punitive. So when we say criminal law, we know that it is meant to exclude, it is meant to penalize, it is meant to stigmatize in quotations. But when it is applied to healthcare, then it becomes absurd, then it becomes dangerous. So if we say a midwife providing emergency contraceptives to a rape survivor, for example, can be criminalized for aiding abortion, a young girl who has been raped and seeking post-abortion care services can be detained under suspicion of homicide. We've seen that happen in Kenya. We've seen that happen in Uganda almost every day. And these are not just isolated events. They're not just one-off event that it happens today and then it doesn't happen again until the next 2 years. No, we've seen that it happens daily, if you go to the Ugandan newspaper, you will see almost every day a healthcare provider has been arrested for providing abortion services or post-abortion services, regardless of whether the person has been raped. It is a pregnancy that has occurred out of incest. Services is prohibited and is criminalized. So therefore, we would arrest. So we see that the criminal law is now used as a regulatory tool, that's a default regulatory tool in areas like healthcare, which typically demands care, empathy, and rights protection. So I would say that we must ask ourselves, I say this every time, who benefits when healthcare is politicized rather than protected? So when healthcare is criminalized, when it is politicized, when it is policed by our criminal law, who benefits from that? So I'm going to now bring it back. Now, I've been talking about East Africa, I've been talking about Uganda. I know that most of us here are Nigerians. So I'll circle back to conversation around Nigeria. So in Nigeria, we have legal frameworks that sort of governs consent and confidentiality in healthcare. So let's talk about SRHR in Nigeria, for example. Our legal frameworks, like we know, are drawn from common law, from statutory instruments and professional ethical guidelines. However, many of these statutes or these legal frameworks are inherited from colonial era British legal traditions. So what we know, or what I would say, is that these frameworks do not always align with the lived realities of Nigerian adolescents currently, or the lived realities of vulnerable adults, especially in the context of displacement and poverty, in which many women seek care. So under Nigerian law, for example, persons under 18 years are generally considered to be minors and legally incapable of providing valid consent. So they cannot provide consent for medical treatment like SRHR services. But paradoxically, Nigerian law recognizes that these same individuals can marry below 18 under customary laws or under Islamic law. What that happens is that what we are seeing now is a legal contradiction. So for example, when the Child Rights Act sets 18 years as the age of majority and then protects children from early marriage and harmful practices, we say that this is not domesticated in all states, you know? So especially like in the northern Nigeria, where we know we have early marriage and parental control over medical services. So what happens in situations of conflict, for example, where there is a 16-year-old who is married and who is sexually active, do we deny her contraceptive care because she's not yet 18? Or do we deny her STI care because she's not yet 18? So these are the questions that needs to be asked and needs to be answered. Or what happens when an adolescent, for example, is facing accusation of misconduct or legal liability? What happens in that situation? So now I'm going to circle back again to confidentiality. We've talked about consent to care and legal age restrictions. I highlighted that according to the Nigerian law, 18 years, persons under 18 years are generally considered to be minors and not capable of providing valid consent for medical treatment, right? Especially or including SRHR service. However, under customary law or under Islamic law, these same persons under 18 years are allowed to get married. So that is it for consent to care and legal age restrictions. Just something for us to think about as we continue the conversation. So now we move to confidentiality. So confidentiality is not explicitly codified in Nigeria's general legal provisions. So while the Code of Medical Ethics in Nigeria, for example, and the Medical and Dental Practitioners Act require practitioners, healthcare practitioners, to generally maintain patient confidentiality, we know that there is limited clarity, especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights. So, for example, in situations involving unsafe abortion complications, healthcare workers, often feel pressured or they're explicitly directed to report these cases to police under the criminal code and the penal code, which we know, like I had earlier said, criminalizes abortion except to save the life of a mother. So this obligation to report, whether it's formalized or whether it's informalized, what does it do? It erodes trust, it discourages care seeking, and it basically drives patients into unsafe abortion pathways. So, in conflicts and humanitarian settings, such as the internally displaced persons camp, where we know that the health needs are urgent, right? I went to the internally displaced persons camp in 2022 when I was doing my research, and almost every woman that I interviewed there had mentioned that there were situations of self-abortion services. So therefore, what do? They take something, okay, we call it hanger in Nigeria, what we typically use to hang clothes, right? They use that and they self-abort by themselves, risking their life. Of course, we know that many of them from that instance, of course, would say that they could have died, or maybe one or two have died. We never can tell. But that was the situation in internet displaced persons camp in Abuja and Adamawa as at 2 years ago. I don't know what the situation is right now, but I'm sure it is not any different. So another situation is that Nigerian law does not formally recognize the principle of evolving capacities. And what is the principle of evolving capacities? It is a concept that is it's a concept that is embedded in international frameworks like the Convention on the Rights of a Child. And what does this framework say? It basically allows adolescents to consent to medical care based on maturity rather than age fixed, rather than, okay, how old are you? Are you 18? Are you 16? So what happens is that providers are legally vulnerable when respecting adolescent SRHR choices. So in Nigeria, because we do not have that principle of evolving capacity, we still say that at 18 years you're a child, so therefore you cannot access SRHR services. But it also says below, if you're below 18, you can also get married. So even if they are married or they are pregnant or they are parents themselves, the law infantilizes them. So but we are seeing that across the continent, particularly in East Africa, people are beginning to resist this. We are seeing a system of movement building where lawyers, health practitioners, and even members of the community are beginning to challenge this status quo. And that is one of the things that we do at Afia Haki. We have contributed to strategic litigation. Sometime a few months ago, we sued the federal government of Nigeria, the ECOWAS court, for failing to provide abortion and post-abortion care services for a 15-year-old girl who had been raped by her boss. You know, she was a maid in that particular house. He raped her consistently, and then she got pregnant. When she got pregnant, she was refused abortion services and was forced to um carry the child to term. Of course, we lost that case, but the court noted that Nigerian government, as a party to the Maputo Protocol, is bound to ensure that the provisions of the Maputo Protocol are either domesticated or at least translated in its national laws. So that for us, even if we lost the case, was something that we felt like we could hold on to the very tiny, tiny gains. At least when you keep making faint marks, one day the marks will become visible. So in East African court, like I said, in East Africa, people are beginning to resist this medical status quo. In Uganda, there's a particular case that I would drop the link on the chat. It's a case called Sead and others versus the Attorney General. So this case basically involved a young girl who had been okay, it basically involved a woman who had twins. One of the twins died, and when the second child died, the parents were not aware, but the mother kept emphasizing that she heard the cry of two babies. And after a long and short story, the full case, with the link of the full case would be on the group chat. The court held that the government's failure to provide basic emergency care, including having trained staff and drug availability, violated the constitutional right to health. And the court ordered audits and held that the denial of care and the underfunding of health of hospitals, for example, is unconstitutional. We also had that same a similar judgment in Kenya in the PAK and Salim Mohammed versus the Attorney General of Kenya. In this case, the court held that medically necessary abortion. So there was a situation whereby a young girl, I think she was 15 also, had an abortion. And actually she was at the verge of dying. So the mother took her to the hospital, and the doctor felt that a medical abortion was necessary to save her life. Just immediately after the abortion had been procured, police stormed into the hospital, arrested the child, and arrested her mother and the doctor. And this case was taken to court, and the court held that medically necessary abortion is a fundamental constitutional right. And it struck down the arbitrary arrest of patients and providers, and then called upon Parliament to align abortion laws with the Constitutional Court. We've also seen advocacy um, in Malawi and in Zimbabwe challenging outdated colonial laws that continues to restricts bodily autonomy and criminalize reproductive decision. So what these cases have done is that they remind us that the law and the courts can be used as sites of resistance, that the court can also go beyond being interpreters of the law to being potentially defenders of health justice, especially when mobilized with evidence and strategic clarity. I wanted to emphasize that one of the reasons why the case at ECOWAS failed was because of lack of evidence. And lack of evidence was, of course, the case had happened about 10 years back. And so you know that all of these things in that kind of situation, some evidence would have been lost and some of them outdated possibly. So the courts, like we're seeing in across Africa, have now begun to be defenders of health justice, especially when we're there and you have clarity and you have all your evidence. We've seen the courts interpreting this judgment with taking into consideration some of the lived experiences and even the socioeconomic conditions of the survivors. So I think that I would conclude by saying that we have several things that we could reflect on. First of all, we need to think about decriminalizing care. So health services, especially those that are related to reproductive and sexual health, I personally feel should be removed from the domain of criminal law. Because like I had earlier mentioned, when we talk about criminalizing, we're talking about exclusion, we're talking about things that situations that typically exclude and punish. But for healthcare, we know that providers of healthcare must be protected and not punished. And secondly, we need to think about reforming consent and confidentiality in order to reflect real life needs. So this includes, enabling adolescents, displaced persons, marginalized group, vulnerable populations to access care safely, confidentiality without any fear of legal intimidation, And additionally, we need to think about bridging the health justice divide. So we see that many times there's fragmentation between lawyers and healthcare providers. So this fragmentation must be bridged. And how can it be bridged? I would recommend that lawyers should be trained around issues of public health, and health professionals should also be trained to understand legal rights. So what is key here is interdisciplinary. There are so many intersections between health and the law. That is why you now have people who say they are health lawyers, right? Because you cannot typically separate one from the other. Additionally, we need to think about investing in legal empowerment so that communities can know their rights, providers can understand their duties, and then the law would become a tool of justice, not just repression. And then finally, I think that we need to center African leadership when we're thinking about reforming medical legal frameworks. And this is not about like importing models from the West, but it's about legal imagination of health equity that is rooted in our lived realities, in our values, and in our systems. I would close by saying that health system reflects the laws that govern them. So if a law is punitive, the health system would punish. If a law is exclusionary, then care would be withheld. But if law is rights-based, if it's justice-based, if it's inclusive, then the health systems can heal, not just medically, but socially and structurally. And I hope that we all here commit to building that kind of law, that all of us can commit to building that kind of care, not just for people around you, but for everyone who fall, especially those who falls under the marginalized and vulnerable groups. Let's show them that together we can create a just and inclusive healthcare system. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica Oga. It's been a very interesting session, and it took me back to the classroom. I felt like I was in class listening to my lecturer telling me things about, the laws in African laws, and how, African laws are punitive, and how they translate into our health systems. Thank you so much for very, very interesting talk, because I really enjoyed myself. But I want to, before we go into questions, I know that our audience has questions for you, but I just want to quickly go, and I crave your indulgence. I want to quickly go to our next speaker, and I want her to talk. Then we can ask the questions together, and we can be done in no time. Right. So I know that our audience has a lot of questions to ask you, but I crave your indulgence, and please, I know that this may be overstepping a bit, but I believe that I think I have the power to.
It's totally fine by me. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you once again for this interesting talk, and thank you for being here today. And I know that the rest of us and people who have listened to you talk today really appreciate it. I'll move on to our next speaker, Ms. Chinasa Imo. I hope you're ready for us, ma'am. So I'll start by asking and saying that you've had a lot of experience working on public health initiatives, and you're also the convener of What About Rural Health. So I want you to talk to us about, walk us through that journey of working with public health initiatives and the work you currently do with What About Rural Health. Then speak to us about the challenges faced by rural and low-resourced populations and the strategies to overcome them. Thank you very much. Ms. Chinasa Imo, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. And thank you, Dr. Jessica, for that. I was listening and I'm like, yeah. What I was thinking about is, now I know why Titi told me that she knows you. So it's a small one after all. So Farida, if you could allow me to share my screen, I think I'm a little bit of a more structured person. Otherwise, I'll be here 1 hour talking to you about my passion and profession. So allow me to share my screen. That allows me to
Yes, I've made you co-host, so you can share your screen. Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how to do this share screen business. Share. What am I sharing?
Well, you could send it to me and I'll project it. So while you speak, I'll just...
Perfect. That is what I would have done. Can you access it via WhatsApp?
I should be able to.
Okay. So let me just do that quickly. I'm so sorry. This is a question I would have asked since so.
Funny.
All right. PowerPoint. Why? I don't want to be the one delaying everyone.
Well,
okay.
Okay, great.
Now you have it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll just give me a couple of minutes to project it. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead. All right, so yeah, this relieves me a whole lot with navigating PowerPoint presentation and the rest of the talking. Okay, so I think that you've done a good job reeling out my citation, even the ones that I can remember and the ones that I didn't remember, I had them here. So the audience have a good understanding of the kind of work that I do. I just want to say the passion behind it is what is missing from the profile. So as a young person in Nigeria who was striving to, come out of limiting environment. So sometimes people mistake the difference between being in a limiting environment versus coming from a poor environment. I don't describe myself as one who comes from a poor environment because I am from a very middle class family with both of my parents being well-to-do until I lost my mom. However, I grew up in a limiting environment where I saw inequalities happen first with my mom and the experiences with having health challenges up until we lost her in 2002. And then that exposed me to a whole lot of things within the health systems that motivated my action towards what I do right now. And part of that also is the fact that I saw all of these things while I was a young person. So I always put myself in the question, if I'm a young person, what will I do? And that guides the way I do my work. First is empower and build the capacity of young people. And the second, allow them to use that voice to advocate for things that are around health, especially maternal and newborn child, adolescent health rights and programs. So that is basically it. And then first I started IA with a couple of people in Ghana and across West Africa when I had just finished my yearly West African program in Ghana, and we formed this coalition, and we're so happy, excited, being new change makers that were just minted out of West Africa, and we formed AYE. AYE has gone on to become, a regional organization empowering young people through agriculture and entrepreneurship across Africa. We are in 11 countries registered, and we both with the UN Consultative Forum. We've had multiple grants from African Union, and we are with the African Development Bank as used in their youth advisory board. So, but then that's not where the question ends, because I still have the other part that has to do with answering questions around providing access to people in underserved community. And that is when I founded CD Hub, very close to my hometown and my state in Abia State, where we have headquarters. What we do is combine the use of evidence and capacity building to create policy forums where people who will build their capacity advocate for whatever it is that concerns them. Because I live in the US, I don't know what concerns them, but I feel like if we hand them the right tool and show them how to use their voice in an effective way, they can do the job for themselves. And that is what CD Hub has been doing for the past 3 years. And then for What About Rural Health is a communication brand that I just recently found. And that speaks personally to myself as an activist, advocate, someone who just don't take no for an answer. And I wanted to use a combination of my expertise to begin to activate that question in the mind of everyone when we talk about access to healthcare, because it can be enveloped in the overarching discussion about health equity. And we forget that irrespective of the fact that many people live in urban and suburban area, that the people who live in rural, marginal spaces, urban slums, and some other kinds of environments have it far more difficult to access health than those who live closer to where they receive services. Farida, are you able to share the screen?
Yeah, I'll do that shortly. So I've just
Okay.
downloaded it and I'm about to share it now.
Okay, so that is what guides my work, and that is what I've been doing for the past how many years. And in between all of that, I've been combining the need, but also the desire to acquire further knowledge in doing what I do better. So in between working, I usually go back to school. I had my first master's in 2012 from University of Lagos. And then I had the second one in 2020 from University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. And now I'm in a PhD program. So there's always the gap between working and schooling, because I'm someone who likes to sit in a quiet environment and create ideas and then work through people to implement it. So for today's talk, I set up the agenda bearing in mind that we have a solid doctor on ground, Dr. Jessica on ground, who would, take all the legal aspect of the work. However, I was also approaching and looking at my conversation from the legal perspective. What does policy and legal framework do to health equity? So my agenda will literally cover me giving you health equity landscape, and then the barriers with the case studies. That's the medico-legal barriers using case study, and then policy frameworks in Nigeria, particularly in Nigeria, that should or that is fashioned in a way that they should protect healthcare users. Whether they do that or not is what me and you will discuss here today. And then we look at the strategies that we can move forward in advancing this. Are you now able to share your screen?
Technology gets the better of us when we're trying our best, but
That's true.
this is one challenge that I have to overcome, and I know that I'm going to do that very soon. My apologies to everybody, because I know that this glitch is delaying us a little bit, but we're going to solve it very soon. I don't know why my laptop decided to embarrass itself and not me. Spoken like a true Nigerian, but it will be up in a couple of minutes, please. Thank you.
Let me see if I can retry. At least yours is your laptop that is embarrassing you. Me, technology is not my strong suit. Caskia, I did not learn it and go through there. But I don't know. I don't see the option to share screen.
Are you signing in with a phone or a laptop?
No, I'm with my laptop.
Okay, so it's at the end, the bar at the end, and
Can you see it?
Okay, great. Yes, we can see it. Oh, Lord have mercy. We can see it. Thank you so much. I'll still see if I can. Is it fine? I'd like our audience to see if it's fine the way it is, or would rather it be shared on a laptop screen.
Is it me?
I can see it. I can see it, and I believe
Yeah, but it's not yet on slide mode. I'm trying
Yes.
to, my screen has over 1 million things that I don't want to close. So I'm trying to make sure that in the process of doing all this, I don't close the screen, but I want to put it on the slideshow. Let me see. So can you see it on slideshow?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, perfect.
Okay. But now what do I do? Oh my God. This is the problem. I don't know how to manage multiple screen. Okay, so I think we can continue. So for today, seriously, this one is not working for me. It's not working for me.
I'll still keep trying so that when I get it on, I can help you with the controls, if that's okay by you.
Yes, because it's blocking everything that I need to focus on. All right, so I think basically talking with you is the most important thing. So let me go and start off so that we'll reduce time wasting. So for the learning objective, I stopped sharing my screen, right? So for the learning objectives within these 20 minutes, I'm hoping that I could deliver this in 20 minutes. My aim is to unpack systemic and structural challenges that people face when receiving healthcare, especially in low resource environments. And my presentation today is going to focus in Nigeria, even though I'm going to draw examples from this place in the US where I am, and then we can all think about, have a forward thinking around policy and practices that we can use to improve healthcare equity. So strong health system and robust legal framework are essential for achieving health equity, especially in underserved community. And a strong health system entails that, things like maternal care, emergency health, and preventative health are available, and that they are accessible, and they are of good quality. And I know that the previous speaker has spent so much time discussing on this, so there's no point, describing what this means. And this has to be regardless of where a person is and how much that person have. So whether you have too much money or less money, health should be at least a basic, right that a state provides to you. Meanwhile, legal framework are established to protect the right to health, hold government accountable, and empower individuals to lay claims to equitable care. So when care is not provided to you in a respectful and equitable way, it is through the legal framework that you should be able to seek redress or hold people accountable. And when both of these systems work effectively, then we can say that there is health equity. And both of them also help us address structural issues that most people in rural, low-income, marginalized environments face all the time. So why does this matter for all of us here in this webinar? I'll begin by asking a very simple question, and please, let's be spontaneous. If you have the response, put it in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and throw in your punch. What happens when laws meant to protect our health do not reach the communities that are most in need of it? What do you think happens? I'm unable to hear you. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes. I'm looking at the chat. No response? Any response? Okay, so I'm gonna move on. For me, working in rural communities in Nigeria and in some part of West Africa, I've seen how policy frameworks often assume uniformity. So what is applied to A must be applied to B because it's just the law of the land. But health systems are not equal, and health systems are not equal, and we should not be approaching things from that equal perspective because some people need more than the other in order to meet a par. And that is where I begin my conversation around health equity conversation and why it matters. So first of all, I would start by defining, I mean, many of us know what this means, but if I don't put in this perspective, we can be misusing the terminologies in different ways. So when we talk about equity, what we mean is, giving people what they need to reach the same outcome. Now, this focuses on fairness for addressing unequal starting points or barrier. And it's not necessarily because A has it, B must have it. But it could mean that because A has a lot, sorry to put it this way, because A has a lot, we can repurpose what we could give additionally to A to give to B so that B will get to where A is currently situated. So that is what equity means. And within that bucket, we also have what we call equality, which is the first one that I explained, meaning giving everyone the same resources and opportunities regardless of their circumstances. What that means is when you are in a bus traveling and you have a 9 months pregnant woman who is almost about to give birth, heading to the hospital, and you have a young boy with their earpiece jiving to, Lil Bow Wow, and you be like, well, they all have equal opportunities, so, there's just one seat. I mean, the person who comes first or, should sit. Meanwhile, the pregnant woman, you obviously know that the pregnant woman cannot withstand the journey. So that is what it is. And in healthcare, equity would mean everyone get the same thing. But when we look at healthcare in general, there is inequality in healthcare. And this, I refer to measurable differences in health status or access to health services between different populations, which may or may not be unfair, but often reflect deeper systemic issues. So the fact that we want the pregnant woman to sit, and allow the young boy to stand, is not necessarily unfair, but if we don't do that, that means we are reiterating systemic issues that causes women to either have, give birth in a very strenuous condition or even die on the way while trying to get to hospital. So in unpacking all of this for rural communities, you would see that rural communities mostly face lack of infrastructure, qualified healthcare workers, and legal representation. But beyond access, we are looking at how hard it is for decision makers to make decisions that reflect this demography. For instance, marginalized women, youth, people in conflicted areas like those in the northeastern part of Nigeria where there is conflict. Like all those things has to be put in the table, and we begin to look at how to address them, equitably. So I want to ask a question, and this time around, I really hope someone will help me answer the question. When you think about the community that you live in, what are the most pressing issues that you observe there? Can someone, I would really want someone to unmute their mic and say something. Hello?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah. For me, I think the most pressing issue in my community now is the reinforcement of the health system, because our healthcare system is so weak and so poorly funded. Like only 4% of the nation's national budget goes to health, which in that the money is not even able to reach the rightful promoters of health. So for me, I think the most pressing issue in my community now is the reinforcement of the our health system, because the population are actually suffering from some types of illnesses that could be avoided if the health system was actually strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much for providing that response. You really put it like you hit the nail. How do they say it? You need the hammer on the nail. So thank you. So we can see the glaring disparities in his community, and that reflects everywhere. So recently, like I said, I started what about rural health, and we're collecting stories. And these challenges reflect in so far the stories that we've seen submitted to us. Now, imagine a pregnant woman in, say, remote Kaduna. She might face 2 hours going to hospital from her house to there, and she needs to travel in motorcycle over a bad road, to get there. And then when she gets there, there is understaffed. There is no essential life-saving equipment. There is even no electricity. This is not just about distance now that we are talking about, is everything put together. And research have shown that over 60% of Nigerians living in these rural areas lack these essential life-saving equipment or services because there are no functional health, there's no functional healthcare centers. There are literally no functional. I don't know if it started now that I left, but I did quickly before I left in 2020, I did a docu-series on the state of our PHCs from Niger State, to other states that we were working at Mamaye. It was abysmal. Like you literally cannot find any functional primary healthcare center. And now you can wonder why people would die from highly preventable diseases like typhoid and malaria and diarrhea. Things that we shouldn't worry about are things that are killing people in rural community. Now, we have people who are within the buckets that we call the low-income group. And the National Health Insurance Act of 2022 mandated that, health insurance be provided to everybody. However, less than 10% of Nigerians are currently enrolled in that program. This means that over 80% of people still pay out of pocket. What does that do? It pushes people to catastrophic health expenditure. The little money that you have, you are also capping out of it.
Himself and every other
Hello?
that relates to legal practice, including to.
Hello, are we together?
Yes, please. Sorry about that.
Okay. So what that means is the little money that people struggle to get, they cap out of it to also pay, catastrophic expenditure for healthcare services that they receive. And what does this indicate? When people cannot afford this care, it's either they don't go, or they go to quacks, or they seek alternative measures that are far more riskier than just walking up to a medical center and receiving care. And then I talked about, conflict areas being specifically affected by most of these. People are grappling with safety. When you add healthcare challenges to it, that becomes a problem. And doctor, when she was speaking, she mentioned going to IDPs. I don't know if part of your visit, you went to the one in Maiduguri. When I went to the one in Maiduguri, it was an eyesore. At the height of Boko, it was an eyesore. People defecate because there's no proper wash program. People defecate and they eat within that environment that they are staying and being protected due to conflict and war. So now imagine having all that, being incapacitated by war, and then having to grapple with how do I survive with social determinants of health and assessing healthcare. So that could paint a better picture. And then many people usually ask me, why is it that when we talk about health and health equity, it's always women and children, maternal and newborn health, that is used as example? Well, those are indicators of not just individual well-being, it's also indicator for family well-being, it's also the indicator for overall country well-being. So when you look at a state's well-being, you needs to trace whether their children who are from 0 to 1 age and under 5 are healthy. You have to consider the healthiness and the well-being of pregnant women and, you know, the maternal processes in giving birth in the hospital and other social welfare care within that spectrum. If those things are not telling, then there's a problem in that country. And that is why when you look at indices in the global north, that is the place we term the developed economies, the United States of America is on the last list. It's like, in fact, their indicators is, some of their indicators are as what is even far worse or similar to most that we would see in global south countries. Why? Because these things are not being prioritized, especially maternal and newborn health in the US. I mean, that's a whole lot of conversation within their health financing structure and the way privatization work. But it shows you that these are core indicators to look at the healthiness and wealthiness of a country. So when women and children and adolescents are unable to receive the care that they need, when mortality rates from children and women are high, then that country is not doing what they are supposed to do. So how do we navigate the Nigerian policy and legal terrain? So law, as we see it, can, in theory, I don't know what the practice is, I'm not a legal practitioner, in theory, should be a tool for protection and access. Quid. But in practice, it can be a two-edged sword because, one, when we look at the people who are making those policies, those laws, how they are framing them, when we look at people who are empowered by those legal frameworks and the ways that they are applied, then we can now say that, well, this law is not doing what it's supposed to do, or yeah, this is doing what it's supposed to do because it covers all this. So what does law, what should law really do for us as people seeking care? On one hand, in Nigeria, we have enabling frameworks like, you know, the National Health Act of 2014. We also have the Nigerian Social Protection Policy. And then within that, in African countries, most of our constitution, you know, includes clear protections, you know, and clear provisions of how citizens should be treated. So, but due to things like underfunding, you know, misinterpretation of law, and then corruption and other things that happens within our environment, these things have become like Doc will call it, what did you call it? Something for control. You know, it's now used to control the populace, or even not just even control, but it's also used to remove services from those who needs it because we are unable to really interpret it the way it should be. So let's look at how laws can be a barrier for us. And one of the gaps that I see is that the legal frameworks and most of the legal frameworks in Nigeria and the policies that comes with them have a direct disconnection between what the people want and what the letters of the law says. In remote communities, how many women, you know, how many women would we say know their rights to at least consent when they go to hospital? Or that they even have the right to refuse care. I have the right to refuse care. You know, this is me sharing personal story. I had a surgery, an elective surgery that was suggested to me by my care provider, and I vehemently said no. First, I agreed, and we scheduled that surgery. It was actually supposed to happen yesterday. No, on Wednesday. And then I wrote back to him through our communication system. I'm like, I don't think I want to go ahead with this because you have not provided me all-round comprehensive information that will allow me make that decision to go ahead with this surgery. Now, that is something many of us do not have the capacity to do because we don't even know we do have that capacity to do that. We don't even know we have the capacity to query medical providers, healthcare providers, for them to explain clearly why they think that this line of services is important for our health and well-being, and then we can use that to make informed decisions. And then many people, including the providers, are even afraid of the system, because when they run into legal processes, you know what that means. Pursuing that has been an issue. Like now, for instance, a doctor is sued by, say, a patient who somehow think they know their right, and the doctor knows that, okay, I did all my work well, I didn't do any malpractice, right? But because this person that claimed they know their right could have father and godfather and father of the father in somewhere that could dictate, their fate, that doctor might lose their license, or they might be so afraid of the system that they cannot even come out clearly to defend themselves. So those are the two kinds of problems that this creates. And what does that do? First, we have seen restricted medical and dental practices, even within the letters of the laws, like in telemedicine, where we see, okay, the laws are vague around the use of telemedicine. So providers are unable to work within that vagueness to provide care. Say they want to do virtual services. For instance, if I'm a dentist in Lagos and I have a patient in Port Harcourt, right? Normally, it's dental issues. I can have certain consultation virtually, but because these laws are so vague that they are not clear around how those services should be billed, how those, the liabilities around that, people are afraid to offer such services. Now, the patient has to travel all the way from Port Harcourt to Lagos just for consultation, not even surgery, just for consultation that could have happened over over the phone. There's also a lot of gap within the National Health Act and the National Health Insurance that perpetuates inequity. For instance, while the National Health Act mandates that basic healthcare provision ensure minimum service package for everyone who receive basic care, but how many people are in the insurance? What is the implementation? How are they being implemented? All these things becomes the question that makes it very weak for people to actually go and take up that insurance, or for them to go to the hospital and say there is a clear provision for someone like me to receive at least basic care from my basic healthcare facility, because the basic healthcare provision funds provides these services to me. And then when we also look at informed consent, there's a part of the National Health Act that mandates informed consent. I think is in section 23. Yeah, section 23 of the National Health Act of 2024 has a provision for that. But in a situation in rural health place where surgeries are recommended for women, but their husband has to give consent, or somebody who is the head of the family has to give consent, even when the woman is experienced, at least the woman who is going through the pain, who needs services, who need care, knows that this would be a life-saving decision for them. But the rights are taken away from them because they don't know about all these consent processes. And they are waiting for validation from their husband or from whoever is the head of the family before this is done. And even within the medical practice, as we see this happen, we'll be like, yeah, the husband needs to give consent. Meanwhile, over here, there are ways to override that from a legal perspective in the healthcare settings, when you know that your patient, there is a life and death situation, and there are clear legal department within the hospital or within the health facility that can navigate through the law to make sure that this woman gets care with or without the husband consent, as long as the patient himself or herself have given that consent. So, but when these things are fluid, there is no law providing this clear understanding, and there is no high level of literacy, literacy around health rights within the society, you can see what all these things poses for us as a people. And then the last one that I want to talk about is medical negligence and malpractice. Yes, we've seen existence of a lot of medical negligence from the healthcare providers themselves. Even the way they talk to patients. In fact, there is a bubbly concerns that have been registering to our office in Umuahia with the Federal Medical Center in Umuahia. You literally have to beg the nurses and the doctors to collect bribe from you to give you medicine. Like, why? And patients are going there. In fact, someone told me and said, well, if you want your, family member to die, like family member you hate so much, you want them to die, but you don't want them to say you are the one who killed the person, just take them to Federal Medical Center. Now, when such things is happening, what does that mean? It erodes trust within the system, because there's a whole lot of malpractice and the way patients are being treated that makes it even difficult for people to go to the nearby centers, health centers, to receive care. Okay, now we've talked about all of the problem, because the problem can be plenty. If I am here discussing them, I can go along discussing them. But what should we do? What are the practical ways that we can use to mitigate these problems? And I know that within the listeners and our participants here, that we have people from the nonprofit sector, we have legal practitioner, we have medical practitioner. So there is always something from everyone. But let's start from, how do we legally empower our justice system? That's the first question. How do we do that? First of all, we need to expand health, legal rights, health rights education, especially to people in underserved communities with limited education. We need to let them know basics. These are things you should expect from your doctor and from your nurses and care provider. If they're not giving to you, these are ways you can ask this question. Let's start from there. And then there is also the need for paralegals, community paralegals within our local communities. Like here that I am, I've had issues where I needed legal advice. I don't need a lawyer to charge me all the fees, but there are state-provided paralegal services. There are also legal aids that churches and some other places and NGOs are providing to people who they know are low income, who cannot afford, legal legal fees, the exorbitant legal fees. So these aids are provided, and through that process, people can actually know how to navigate their process within the legal system. Then the third one is improving our feedback and accountability mechanism within the practice. This is for medical practitioner. You should be able to listen, here, take on this feedback, go on back into that management planning meeting and figure out how do we improve service delivery so that we can deliver personalized, equitable care to our patients. Well, there are far more structured ways that we can do that by strengthening the legal frameworks within the digital space. We have seen that, in recent time, economies have begun to appreciate the use of digital platforms for delivering care, especially those cares that are, palatable, manageable, that can be provided virtually, like mental health services, and follow-ups, prescription guidance, etc. By strengthening laws around that so that telemedicine and digital health services can have a clearer structure in Nigeria. Places in remote areas where doctors have refused to go to, can benefit from having those legal processes for digital care strengthened. And then healthcare providers who work in those places, because I know like community health workers who are from those places, who have been trained in some ways to provide basic care, can have interactive learning with experts in the city, because those people cannot come closer. We can bridge the gap through technology. And a lot of things have been happening, using this across the world. And I'll tell you, through CDOP, I tried doing that 2 years ago, brought all our partners, run a pilot training. It did not work. Why? Because the government was giving us all of the problems for why they would not, include that in the workload of the health workers, because we trained people who work in the PACs who are public servants, in some ways. So you see the bottlenecks that even when innovations are coming through private environment or through civil society, it is still, the onus still lies on government to strengthen legal frameworks that allow for these things to happen. And that needs to happen and happen quick. Then the implementation and funding of existing laws. Of existing laws. I've talked about the National Health Act and the National Health Insurance Act. Now, in my notes, I said we need to encourage nonprofit civil society to continue to advocate for. But whether we advocate for government to improve funding for health budgets, within the budgetary framework, if implementation does not draw down on this funding, government would deprioritize, because for them, they are plotting input and output. And that is something that we often overlook when we are doing advocacy. If I advocate for 10 shoes to be given to me, and the person who provide the money and never come to pick it up, next year, they will never give me 10 shoes anymore, no matter how my advocacy is strong. So on one part, yes, we should pressure government to continue to improve healthcare funding. But on the other part, we should pressure the people who utilize this funding to utilize them equitably and provide transparency in the way this funding are utilized, so that we can also use this evidence as civil society organization to go back to these people and say this money was utilized and 20 people were served. Meanwhile, it's 100 people that we need to cover. Can you improve upon it? So that is also very important. Secondly, we need to empower communities through legal literacy and participatory policy making. At least within the Nigerian framework, participatory processes work for us because it's institutionally embedded in our history. We like to dialogue, discuss, agree before we adopt. Like, it's as simple as that. And so when policies are made in Abuja-based level, very Abuja-centric, what that means is it becomes difficult for states to even agree to adapt it. It becomes difficult for communities to agree to domesticate those policies. So there should be a coherency between policymakers and community, people, and those who use services. There should be a symbiotic relationship that allows us to make policies that are receptive, and then people can then adapt it. And then the last point that I have here under this section is we should open up space for inter-regional learning. There's a lot of things happening in some countries in West Africa that we can learn from. There are things happening, there are buckets of successes that I myself have also seen from some government. For instance, in Lagos State, when I was working with E4A Mamaye, Lagos State was very receptive to our accountability work around maternal newborn health. That even when we left the program, when the Gates Foundation stopped funding the program, they continued the program till date. So those places, states who are struggling to do that kind of thing, can go and learn from places like Lagos State and Bauchi State, how they are doing it. How are you doing this thing that you are able to maintain your 15% revolving fund to make sure that drugs are available in hospitals? How are you doing it that your health budget is even more appreciable than the national budget put together? So those questions are questions that states can learn from. And then even from the US here, there are things that Nigerians can come learn here. For instance, the way that the legal framework in the US is set up is that it provides patients with safety, and there is also that that evidence of medical liability, whether from the provider or from the receiver. If there is any issue, somebody has to be liable for that. Having that institutionalized makes accountability very easy. And then some states here in the US have what they call health impact assessment. What that means is per every policy that is designed, these states goes to test it among the users to see the equity implication of those policies within the target population the policies are made for. And if it's not an adaptable policy, or if the people don't like it that much, the policy is thrown away because it's of no use if the people don't like it. We can try doing something like that to make sure that we have a comprehensive equity lens in healthcare delivery. So you might ask, so now I've blown out this grammar finish. What is your role in this stake? All of us are stakeholder. Me that is here now, waking up, saying this thing now. I'm also a stakeholder because healthcare is a collaborative effort. So what do we do from the policy maker to the healthcare professional to the civil society organization? There is a role for us to play. At least, very importantly, there is a need to standardize telemedicine regulation across the states. At least that one is absolutely important for policymakers to look at it. And then reform the medical liability law to promote equitable care delivery. Because if people know they can be held accountable, then there are certain malpractices that will not continue to go on. Hello? That will not continue to go on. And then, hello? And then we should strengthen the M&E frameworks, and mechanism for the existing laws that we already do have, like the National Health Act and the National Health Insurance that I use as an example here because it's the one that has a national outlook. I mean, other states do have their state level policies, but these two are kind of like, a broader coverage, even though that coverage has not yet happened holistically. But when we put M&E structure to it, we can know how many in incremental level, how many people are joining the spectrum as the program expands. And for healthcare providers, there's really, the thing where we also know like where our expertise starts and ends and where the rights of a patient, also begin. So we should be aware of the patient's right and the legal framework that is governing your own practice when you do what you do. Document meticulously, not just for clinical reasons, but for medical legal protection and accountability, so that when this evidence are required, for instance, we talk about GBV. If a GBV victim present themselves to you, you know already that this thing require a legal process. You have to document your report in ways that will be helpful for this victim to pursue justice and not just say, I did my work and that is it. I'm not a policeman after all. And then you, at the end of the day, what you have been done is stripped that person the ability to seek justice for the harm done on their body. So we should always put that in mind. And then advocate for policy reform through our association. I know we belong, Nurses Association, even Midwife Association, Doctors Association. We can use those processes to push for reforms, bring clinical realities to the policy table and say, based on our practices, these are what we think. If policies adjust, then we can provide more or better care for our citizens, So, and then for us, the NGO people, there is nothing, hidden under the sun. We know it all. Marginalized and vulnerable people depend on us, even when they don't say it. People who have been stripped of their power, what else? Sometimes we are the mouthpiece. So let us, be very active in our work, in being that voice for those marginalized people, advocate for legal empowerment. And also, some of these things that I mentioned, especially in the area of legal literacy, we should push that to the community level, take that up and push it to the community level. Engage and facilitate participatory processes that bring lawmakers and communities together to reflect upon what health equity means for them with regards to, legal processes, and then be the watchdog as well between the government and the practitioners. What is government doing well and what they're not doing well? Sometimes we are good in saying what government are not doing well. Sometimes it's also okay to say what government does well. We encourage who does well so they will do more. So in things like that, as the watchdog, we should be able to say, oh yeah, you did well in this area, but improve more on here. That way they know that we are very objective watchdogs and not just people who come to complain when things are not going well. So, well, this is a pivotal moment. We can see that the challenge is significant, and we all have the opportunities to use law as a powerful tool to promote health equity. So, thank you very much for your attention and your engagement. I am now happy to take any question, and I hope that you can make this an interactive process. So, thank you so much. Bye. No, not bye. The floor is open. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very enlightening session. So initially, while we were starting, we had a little glitch because of technology. I apologize once again for that. I have thrown the floor open oh, okay, great. Dr. Fresh has a question. Dr. Fresh, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
So I think because we also did have two speakers, that it would be nice for you to direct your question appropriately so that we can know who jumps in to answer you. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. That was very engaging to both speakers. Unfortunately, I stepped out for some time, I think at the second speaker's speech, and even for the first speaker, I had to attend to some things, so I could not follow from A to Z, as it were. But I thank you. Very engaging, and I learned something. I have questions and comments, and maybe I should just drop them. I will try to see if I can remember who to. I think for Miss Imo, did I pronounce it well?
Yes, please, go ahead.
For Miss Imo, I think there was, I think you were trying to make an analogy in terms of medical legal litigation and said something about patients who feel like they know their rights. Whilst I get what you're trying to say, but as a patient rights advocate, I think we should, regardless of, we should aspire to a legal system where everyone can ventilate and test the system. So when we say things like patients who feel like they know their, of course, I mean, we should aspire to where people should know their rights, and even when they don't feel or feel like they know their rights, they are still encouraged to litigate. And with litigation, only litigation, rather one of the ways with which we can bring reforms is through a very robust system that can be percussed. And from that percussion, we can find solutions. For the doctor, I think I may be wrong, but I think I heard something where she drew similar, like she insinuated that abortion is the same thing as contraception. I think where they unite is because they can both fall under sexual and reproductive health services. But for abortion, we are terminating a fetus. And for contraception, we are preventing the formation of a fetus. They do not have the same legal or medical or even ethical construct if we think about it. Also, for the first speaker, underage marriage, and I really don't know what the law says in Nigeria at this point in time, but I believe that if a woman of less than 18 or less than 16, at least in my jurisdiction, if that woman wants to get married, you need to apply to the minister of health or minister of maybe gender welfare to give permission. Is it the same thing in Nigeria? And also, So when we want to, before we criminalize, are we criminalizing all of it, or we criminalizing the ones that did not get permission, if it happens like that? What is the, for sexual and reproductive health services in terms of age, what is the status quo in Nigeria? I think this is also a general question to everyone, because in my jurisdiction, we talk about any woman can access sexual and reproductive health services. But I really do not know if in Nigeria we use age, and what happens, for instance, if a 7-year-old child is menstruating and we say maybe only 18-year-old. So I just really need to know. Again, what is the age of consent in Nigeria in terms of sexual activity, in terms of medical treatment? And what are the constructs of providing abortions in Nigeria? Is it rape, incest, threats to life, or all of the above? Then lastly, we talk about access to care. I need us to really look at the role of doctors in terms of access, preventing or contributing to access, as it were. Most times when we look at the patient's rights being denied, the service providers as well may not even know the limits in terms of the legality and the morality of those actions. And that is why I'm very big on education. And lastly, this is my opinion, and I think maybe we can discuss more about it after this session. I think when we start talking about health rights or health access, equality can override equity. Because if we start talking about equitable access to a right, then that shows we have a problem already. And I think health or access to health is one of those rights that, if we really think about it, equality can bring about equity and not the other way around, because it's a basic / fundamental human right. And we cannot be talking about equitable distribution of a right that should be equally available to everyone. But this is something for debate, and it would be nice to talk about it at some point. I submit, and thank you for listening. Thank you once again for the lectures.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Fresh Ife, for raising the question. And I also saw that you put it in your question. So I would address that, and then I'll come back to address, because the last submission you made was around...
Let me just say something, please.
Can I address this so that I don't forget? Can I address this so that I don't forget?
Yes, please,
so,
go ahead.
When I used that analogy, I had just finished from making a clear distinction of patients' right. I just used that analogy in Nigerian parlance to say people who, in some way use privileges that they are not supposed to use because they feel they have more of those privileges. And I believe that we understand that from that context, and not to oppose the ability of anybody to seek legal redress. If there's anything my entire presentation has been, is for patients to be able to become aware that they can seek legal redress. But there are cases in a corrupt reading environment, you just feel that you don't like the face of the doctor, or you feel that there was a lag time in delay, therefore you want to pull all the resources within your armpits to show that doctor that you can suppress their practice. So that is within that framework that I'd made that use. People who feel, it's an analogy, it's a feeling. So I'm not saying that that person doesn't have their right. Remember, I'm not a legal person. I'm delivering a lecture. I understand where you're coming from, but let's not push it too far beyond learning. And then I want to push very back, like more backer, the last point that you say. The reason why we are now moving from the conversation of equality to equity, because we see that applying concept of equality cannot be overboard. I just make a case with a pregnant woman. So if you're saying, let's stick on equality because it allows the legal framework, for us to write laws in a very uniform, generic way, then we are missing the point that some people need things more than the other. We are missing the point that some people can have very easy access to things more than the other. So if you're saying let's keep giving very equally, that means if I am privileged to have $1 million and government is sharing $1 million, I should have more $1 million, right? Meanwhile, somebody has a bigger health problem that probably requires $2 million to solve, and I don't even have it. But because just government is dashing on $1 million, just give it to me. Meanwhile, this person is in a deficit. So I push it far back, and it has been established, whether academically, by scholarship, and within, forums of participatory discussions, that when we look at health from equity lens, it becomes easy for us to provide adequate services to targeted population that needs them. We are not saying ignore the people who, other people who also need it, but what we are saying is that it opens up the fora for us to begin to look at what are those things that we are neglecting. Because, for instance, if I am a person that is abled differently and you apply equality to me, what you're saying in essence is that I should not have, access to the hospital because everyone walk up the stairs. I should figure a way to walk up the stairs. And to me, that is inhumane, because while you make up stairs for two able-legged people, you should make a wheel space for people who are able differently so that they would also get to the 5th floor and get the services they need from the care provider on that 5th floor. I raise my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting submission. Thank you so much, Madam Chinasa Imo. I know time is not our friend. As Nigerians, and this is putting myself in view now, we should work on our time management. Because this webinar was supposed to end by 4:30 at the latest. And I know that I had promised, I had given my word to end it even earlier, but well, things happen. But thank you very much. Dr. Fresh, thank you so much for, it's good to have voices that, come in and, they sort of like want better understanding, want clarity, they want to challenge, hear those voices that we can think critically about what we're saying, what we're taking, and what we are learning, so that we can learn. We are to learn and relearn and unlearn. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that I would have to, if Ms. Chinasa can be with us longer, I know she has commitments, so I would like to release her now if she has to go onto our other commitments. But thank you so much for being here, and I'm craving your indulgence, if you don't mind. Can we share your email in case people have more questions to ask you?
I actually did have a lot of information in the last slide of the
okay,
last slide.
Okay, great.
I have my website, I have my email, I have, for you to also look at the work that my 3 organizations do. I included all that link, and I'm glad you have the PowerPoint. Please, you have my permission to share it to whoever who wants to lay hands to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have to run. I have an interview by 11 for, I'm trying to recruit a new staff to my team.
Thank you.
So, but it's beautiful being with you guys today. Thank you so much for having me to MedLaw. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really do appreciate this time. And for everyone who listened, I hope there's 1 or 2 things that you're gonna go home with from this webinar. Thank you so much. I'll jump out now. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's still here with us today, still here with us right now. I've seen that the numbers have decreased, but thank you to everyone that have stayed thus far. Before we go, I just want the founder of MedLaw Hub, Mr. Damilare Adeoye, to talk to us, to give us some closing remarks. And while he's doing that, address some things that have been raised in the course of this, the presentations that we just listened to and the questions that were asked, and, you know, him providing his own perspective and the perspective of the law to the questions that were raised and the issues that have come up in the course of this webinar. So, Mr. Damilaria, in fact, everybody has been a doctor or almost a doctor, so a doctor has entered my mouth, but I can give it to you. So please.
I will make my submissions very succinct. I know that we have far beyond the time allocated for this webinar. I want to appreciate everybody here, and I hope I'm audible enough. Please let me know if I'm not talking to myself.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you so much. It's been a great time here, and I believe we've all actually, you know, gotten one or two things from this webinar. I personally, maybe because I've been practicing in this area for a very long time, I could relate to everything that's been said, and I totally agree. And it's a continuous conversation. It's not going to stop with this webinar. You can always reach out to us, to the speakers, if you have any burning question, and we would try as much as possible to respond to you, give you the most appropriate answer, or get one of our experts to respond to you. Dr. Fresh made many analogies, and I am able to relate as well, because he's not just coming from the perspective of being in Nigeria. He's currently in Namibia and he sees the system, and I think he's coming from that angle that some of these challenges are already solved, and right now they are not really a challenge in some countries. And however, Nigeria is a very peculiar country, and that's why everything has to be Nigeria linked. Like, we have to really look at what is realistic in Nigeria. Our laws are very, very static, and if there are law students or lawyers here, the first thing you will learn is always law needs to a level of dynamism to adjust to societal reality. It is not the case in Nigeria. Dr. Ka mentioned some things about the age of consent, till 18, and then spoke about what is universally acceptable in most developed countries, which is the evolving capacity. We as medical lawyers, we know that those laws are like, they are there, like, for us to adopt. But even till date, they are not really applicable in Nigeria because they've not been codified. So it's a challenge. And the fact that the North has its own penal code that they align with, and then we have the criminal code, you know, in the South. And that itself causes a lot of discrepancies when it comes to what do we follow in Nigeria. Like I said, it's a continuous conversation, and I don't want to take our time. For instance, even surrogacy, people are going through surrogacy in Nigeria. We don't have a law on surrogacy in Nigeria. It is unbelievable at this point in time that we don't have that. Guess what? People are going to practices in the country. So where do we continue? The problem continues. But that is why this webinar is very crucial for us to have it, and then for us to see what we can actually put in practice, you know, whether as a pressure group or really going there to help out. So I don't know if I've been able to answer Dr. Fresh's question. There is no direct answer at this point. All we can say is the problem is there, and we need to keep assisting, seeing how we can help to make changes in the country. And guess what? We are not limiting it just to Nigeria. This problem is universal. In other countries, they have the same problem, just like Dr. Jessica said, mostly in Africa, but even in other parts of the world, even in Europe, by the way, you'll be surprised that in the UK, a lot of people find it hard to access healthcare, even though they have a system. So it's not peculiar only to Africa. And that is why we try as much as possible on the medical hub to give or to focus on things that are relatable all over the world. And our members are all over the world as well. So everybody can come from their peculiar issues, perspectives, and we can bring it together and make sense out of it. With this point of mine, I think I've made a bit of sense. I hope you all had a great time here. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Of course, we are going to look at another critical issue around, medical legal issue in the country, continent, and universally. And we are going to bring experts to talk about them. Thank you once again. And for more information, there's so much going on our platforms, on our social media platforms, on our website. You can get a lot of information because at the center of what we do is creating awareness around issues like this so that it can trigger change, positive change around the country, all over the world. So please take your time, look into the materials we have on our website, on our platforms, and see how it can benefit you in your different areas or professions. So thank you very much. Currently, we have a competition we are organizing just to push the awareness as well in Nigeria, among Nigerian universities. If there is students and you would like your university to be part of, if not this year, next year, please check our platforms, our LinkedIn most especially, and see how you can register your own club, and you can take it up from there. Thank you, and do have a wonderful evening. I don't know the time in Namibia or which other parts do we have people from. Good morning, good evening, have a good day. And thank you so much. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you so much for that. Let me just answer your question. So about the parts that people are joining from, because I know two of our speakers joined from outside of Nigeria. Dr. Jessica joined from Kenya. Chinasa joined from the US. You're not joining from Nigeria. Dr. Fresh is not joining from Nigeria. And I know that a couple of people also here that are not joining from Nigeria. So thank you so much that despite the time zone differences, everybody here today took time out of their busy schedules to be with us. And it means a lot to us that you're able to attend our webinars whenever we call for it. So we're going to be sending the recording of this webinar, and we're also going to be putting out the information of our speakers and the presentation material that was presented today. So we're going to be sending everything out to everybody that registered for this webinar. And you can also find this webinar, a link to the recording on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much to everybody, and until our next webinar session, bye-bye.